hey, we're Hyphen-Labs. And we founded Hyphen-Labs in 2014. After we met in Barcelona, me and Carmen, we were studying in a very experimental school, advanced architecture and interaction. And we have our backgrounds is in structural engineering, and mine is in interior architecture. So until then, we had a lot of hands-on experiences with spaces and creating spaces. But there we were introduced to a lot of different technologies, a lot of different tools. And then we founded Hyphen-Labs to kind of create the spaces that we actually want to operate in, kind of making them a bit more interactive. And then last year, Ashley joined us, and we expanded our operational world into like filmmaking and product design and speculative design. And neurospeculative Afrofeminism is a project we started last July, and we worked on it for like 6 months. And yeah, I'll give to Carmen or Ashley.
So as Ece said, I joined the team last year. I have a background in molecular biology, and I'm really interested in neuroscience and how to bridge sort of disparate fields through art and technology. And I joined Ece and Carmen last year to see what kind of magic we could come up with, just kind of merging our collective interests. And so this project was born out of that, and is the first of many projects that we want to work on through Hyphen.
And I'll just add my little experience with Hyphen as well. When we started the company, we were, Ece and I had a vision that we could bring like kind of minorities and people's stories to a more global stage. And so we really wanted to give like opportunities to ourselves as women in architecture and technology, where we don't see ourselves a lot in positions of power, and become representatives for generations that come of women that want to start working in emerging technologies. So we work with all types of people from all over the world. But when we started Hyphen-Labs, we were just kind of two girls with a really big vision, and Ashley and a lot of the other women that we've worked with have really complemented and augmented that experience. And this project, Neurospeculative Afrofeminism, is really an homage to this, is our first intention, our first application of our theories and our critiques put into a project that can be experienced through product design, through narrative storytelling, and through scientific research.
It was a response to sort of what's going on in our world from a social justice perspective, from a humanitarian perspective, just kind of thinking about how we can use storytelling to reach each other and see if it can be a tool to decrease prejudice and bias and increase exposure to stories, nuanced stories highlighting, different groups of people. So we wanted to figure out if we could make products, a virtual reality experience and scientific research all around what are Black women's experiences, particularly in STEM. We want to bring exposure to, our younger selves, because we were very entrenched in these industries and didn't really see anyone that looked like us. So it started off with thinking about speculative products, because so often we found that we either had to modify products to fit us or we couldn't use them. So we wanted to come at it from the aspect of designers, like what are our needs? What can we create that highlight those needs?
And how can we look at certain institutions and start to kind of break down and say, all right, minorities, women of color are not edge cases. They are true users and influencers of technology, of media of design and of science, and how can we look at their experiences and their needs and design thoughtfully. So first we're going to take you through our speculative product line. We developed, and this was an education and an exercise in a design field that we don't have a lot of experience in, but we are constant users of products. And one day, Ashley and I, after the the murder of Philandro Castile, wanted to spend some time and kind of practice self-care because we needed to talk about what was going on. And we decided we were going to go to Storm King in northern New York. And Ashley came out of the bathroom and she had a layer of white film on her, on her face and on her body. And I looked at her in the mirror and I was like, what is this? And she's like, this is what sunscreen does to me. So our first product that we wanted to create was a sunscreen that doesn't leave a white film for women of color, people of color who need protection against an invisible monster, let's say. We're also speculating that as we get closer to the sun and start going through the multiverse, we'll need better alternatives for protection. So how can we look and create, or how can we create design interventions in existing fields and create critiques and create products that can be accessible, that can be, used for, many applications for many people with a human-centered design approach. So this was kind of a mock-up. This was just our first exercise, and we don't have a transparent solution, but this is how we can start thinking about our physical built environment and the products that we are marketed and given, and how we could create them if we had a voice at the table.
Next, this is a visor that we created that's supposed to be a symbolic representation of microaggressions. So this is kind of a theory of you having to code switch or change your being when you go into a room and you don't see anyone who looks like you, or you don't feel comfortable, you don't have any camaraderie. So we wanted to make a visor that was allowing our audience, ourselves, to connect through putting this mask down and protecting your interior. And also all of our characters inside of our VR experience are wearing this visor, and it allowed us to connect our physical products in the digital space, but it also allowed us to get around animating their faces. So the visor is made out of a material called dichroic, so you can see out, but the person that you're talking to, or your aggressor, can't see in. And this is what it looks like.
And so and microaggressions are something that we experience as a group when we're together. We see it happening all the time, and we found that not a lot of people even know what microaggressions are. So we want to start creating a space for open discussion about some of the experiences that everyone is having. And so this was a clever way where we could start to blend realities and implement some of the accessories that we would need and want in our physical reality, and then also pass them to virtual reality, as she was saying. So all of our characters have this visor, as you see Brooks wearing it here. And this is also to start talking about what kind of protection are we going to need in these virtual worlds, in these digital realms. We have so many Twitter trolls and spaces where we're unsafe online, and what in this future sphere, how are we going to protect ourselves from that?
And our identity, so taking control of our identity. And we have another product that also kind of leads to that. So this is, we're not in order. Okay, so this next product is one of our most speculative, and it's the narrative driver for our VR experience. There's a technology called transcranial stimulation that exists. It's used for treating depression, pain management that can't be intervened with pharmaceutical means. But there's also a lot of people in the biohacking and quantified self community who are using this as a way to optimize their brains. So at low levels of stimulation, during transcranial stimulation, they think that it could put you into flow states more readily, or allow you to optimize your brain, essentially. So we wanted to create a story around this to see if we could use VR as a way of doing this instead of, actually using the technology to stimulate your brain. So inside of the VR, you go into a neurocosmetology lab and you think you're getting your hair done there, but you're really getting this process of transcranial stimulation done, which we called Octavia electrodes after Octavia Butler. So you go in, you get this experience done, and then you go through the mirror and you see visions, and you're exposed to a whole new world that's really kind of inspired by Afrofuturism as an artistic movement. And then, so for the first one, we wanted to target different brain regions. And so for the first one, it's the amygdala. And then for subsequent chapters of this story, we want to, target different brain regions and have that story kind of stem from there.
What we did, and I don't know if you said this, maybe you did, but we embedded the same technology into hair extensions so that you could have access with braiding techniques. I've used emotive brain sensing machine, or like sensors, and it doesn't fit over my hair. And so when Ashley was talking about getting one for herself, I looked at her and I was like, how are we going to get you that scalp to electrode contact that we need? And, as a Black woman, how could we address your being and create the technology that would fit you? And so she started thinking about, how we could embed that in hair extensions. So this is kind of an artistic representation of what the Octavia electrodes would be. But we want to start looking at, if we were the inventors and the operators of this technology, what would we have it do? How would we be storing our memories? What memories would we be translating and carrying, and what knowledge and experiences, and how can we give each other the experiences to augment our human experience?
And we chose the Salon as sort of a representational space for this because, historically, the beauty shop has been a place of political activation, coming together of the community, exposing people to new ideas. And we wanted to extend that into, talking about emerging technology and, evolution, and, brain and cognitive science. Transhumanism, yeah.
Kind of all of the places in science fiction that we love, but we're left out of sometimes. And do you want to talk about Ruby Cam?
Yeah. Next we have audio and video embedded earrings. This is kind of a protection tool, which is embedded in a daily life object and inspired by the gold door knocker earrings. And oftentimes now when we're in a confrontational situation, especially in the police, our phones or the people who are recording it, those type of instruments are seen as a weapon. So we wanted to embed this protection tool into these earrings, where the only thing you need to do is just to press to the button, and then you can start recording from your own perspective, which optimally would send it to the cloud before anyone can, say, block your connection to the outside world. And we have a actually working prototype which has a little chip inside with a little button, so it can really record to now just for an SD card, but in the future it will be sending it to the cloud simultaneously.
And then our last speculative product is called Hyperface, and this was a collaboration with the privacy artist Adam Harvey. We failed to mention before that these were all very collaborative works. So the earring, we were in collaboration with Michelle Cortez, the visor with AB Screenware. So we worked with people from all over the world to kind of bring their expertise and to create an actual tangible product. Because in the end, we only had about 3 weeks to, implement and materialize our visions. So we needed a group of people who believed in what we were doing to help us realize it. So Hyperface, we thought that we were going to need some type of space to house the electronics, the battery for the earring, before we found a very lightweight spy cam solution. And so we wanted to look at a cultural staple, which is the head wrap, and apply themes of surveillance and protection and create a low-tech wearable solution to privacy. So we embedded a open CV facial recognition scrambling pattern to a textile, and what this does is it obfuscates the data that cameras are receiving. So it instead of seeing my face, now it sees 1,200 faces that are on the scarf. So it essentially camouflages me. It doesn't make my face disappear, but then it adds my face as well as all of the other faces to the existing libraries of that machine learning is using to recognize faces, thus diluting what our faces are. And the idea being that if enough people are wearing this and it becomes dynamic and the faces are moving, we can overload a system and then shut down a major surveillance system. And so this is an actual print of the scarf itself. And so yeah, those are the 5 speculative products that we created. Beyond this, we also created a VR experience. We are all lovers of technology, lovers of digital realities, and our clones are in the internet and in the computer, so we want to be represented in the digital landscape. And we haven't seen ourselves represented in spaces of science and technology. So we decided to create a virtual reality experience that really showcased our ideas, our beings, and our friends, and the things that we love in them. So as Ashley had mentioned before, you enter a neurocosmetology lab where Black women are the pioneers of brain optimization. And you have an experience that addresses you. It takes you away from the passive 2D experience of a video or a movie, and gives you that embodiment. You become a young woman in a salon and kind of have a transformative experience. It's a virtual reality experience, so it does have accessibility issues where film you're able to reach a huge amount of people. But we were really using this VR experience to see if we can use it as a tool to decrease prejudice and bias. And so that's kind of really where our cognitive impact research started. And this was our control, our test for that research that we're really interested in.
There's been research done about whether or not if you embody your audience inside of an avatar that is a different outgroup than they are, if it somehow opens them up to perceiving that outgroup when they encounter them in person with the decreased prejudice and bias. So we wanted to see if we could create a whole experience around Blackness and around different communities of color, and see if we could measure somehow if that decreases, the effects of people's prejudice and bias when they interact with those groups. So we started doing research at Sundance this year, and we're coming at this from a perspective of social psychological research, anthropological research, and down the line we want to do sort of more neurological research like fMRI, mobile EEG studies to see if there's a measured effect. And so we've been analyzing some of the data that we've gotten, and we see that people who are exposed to diversity in their home and work life, really they didn't see a marked decrease. But if people have diversity in their work life but not in their home life, this is a tool that can be used to then further expose them to diversity and inclusion initiatives.
So another thing that we found with creating virtual reality is like we didn't want to separate the mind from the body. So we would set up an actual physical salon. So in the salon, we have a gift shop where all of the products are on display, and then you go into the salon, which is the neurocosmetology lab, and then there's a brain lab, which is where we do the impact research. And in the salon, because everybody knows how to use it and interact with it, and you go into virtual reality, then you're in a future salon space, and you have the same kind of chair, you have the same mobility, and it's just not you looking in the mirror, but you're looking at this other character. So we found that it was, in order to maintain or not have any cognitive dissonance, we wanted to create a priming space for the body before entering into the virtual world. So this is kind of a setup of our experience. And then this is the future space that you're able to go into. We started playing with constraints of reality in this future space, looking at how does gravity, how do materials play, and mimicking a bit our world in terms of like what materials we're using and seeing. And then you go into a future space, where the world is completely different and doesn't obey any laws of our reality. So here's some images, and I'll show you guys a video as well. And in this future space, you meet our three heroes, our three goddesses who represent like youth, who represent a relationship with nature and community, and then who represent technology and futurism. So the bibliodataist, she's young, her right hand is the internet, she's gender non-binary, and she's en route to be a neurocosmetologist. The Wata Communoriza is grounded in nature. She's a watcher protector. She has eyes everywhere, and she has like tree branches that like can protect you. And then the techno Africanum culturist, she's the ultimate transhuman. She creates her own prosthetics, and she holds the universe in balance in her afro.
Means to create a new American mythology in VR and expose our audience to thinking about like what it means to uphold and uplift that mythology inside of a virtual space. As I said before, we want to see if we can use this as a tool to decrease prejudice and bias, and also talk about neuroscience and some of the harder sciences, especially as it relates to representation. So, as I said before, like coming up in STEM fields and not seeing anyone that looked like you, and thinking about, what it means to be the only person in the room. We wanted to create representation for our younger selves and ask, this all started with a question: where are all the Black women in neuroscience? And then it stemmed to you can't be what you can't see. So can we create that representation through a digital mean, and have that be an intervention?
That's it. And if any of you guys are interested in seeing it, we also have like a 2D version of the experience that we can email you, so you can watch it's 4 minutes long, so it's not very long, and you can watch and hear what all of the characters are saying, and kind of not have the virtual experience, but close to it. And we'll be hopefully putting it on mobile, so we can send you that soon too. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'd be happy to answer any questions if you guys have them.
So the product line, for example, is that something, are you going to implement that, or is it really more the process of sort of articulating it and positioning it that's the work, or is it actually an idea to make a sunscreen that actually is going to work on darker skin?
So
Someone buys it.
we have working prototypes of
The scarf,
the scarf
the earrings,
things.
and we want to expand the electrodes actually. The sunscreen, that's a tough buy-in. That's a tough product to
With the FDA? I was going to ask about
not only the
sufficient
FDA,
constraint.
but also companies that want to be creating or that are creating the products. Some of them are, available, but they end up being $60 to $80, which just isn't accessible. It isn't reasonable. So we're starting with the products that are viable. The scarf is it's also our most popular product because it crosses. It's really intersectional. Men and women, young and old, from all backgrounds and cultures are interested in like using it, having it, and being able to have some type of digital or low tech wearable surveillance, counter surveillance tool. So we're going to start with that, see what the response is.
It's also an entry point into talking about these things and talking about the economics of beauty, especially in the Black community. And we wanted to see if having these physical products on display inside of the installation and then having them mirrored inside of the VR creates some sort of bridge for our audience to recognize the space that they're immersed into.
Also, I think the main goal is not to design these products, but actually to create quality conversations around these things, because we took this to a lot of festivals, and there are so many people that thinks that Black people doesn't need any sunscreen. So it's kind of like a conversation starting point for this whole project.
And thinking about human-centered design in general, I think we typically only think about ourselves and our immediate surroundings when we're designing, and Carmen said, we don't think about what is considered an edge case, whether that be through disability, people who have disabilities, or people who are just a different nationality or ethnicity than you, culturally.
Age. Like the Oculus, for example, is a perfect example, because if you don't have any hair and you have great eyesight, it's super easy to wear. But the moment you have big hair and glasses, it's uncomfortable, so it's like the designers themselves aren't looking at any other lenses but their own when designing products that go to mainstream markets and end up having to be something that for people of color or minorities, they have to adjust their being in order to use a product.
Or even thinking deeper about that when you get into algorithmic bias and sort of thinking through who's actually making or who's coding or who's programming, who's doing these things, and who is at the table keeping others accountable.
Can you talk a little bit about your process in developing these? We've talked a bit about co-creation and collaboration. Can you give an example of how this project came about, or a particular product? And also, I know you want to involve more people in design and thinking they can be designers. Have you had any experience with that yet? Have you been able to do that, and what happened?
So first with process, and we'll use one of the products, for example. We were playing on okay, we'll do two things. First, we were playing on Snapchat, and we were wearing something with eyes, and the camera started putting faces wherever it was probably this shirt, actually, or it was a necklace.
Yeah.
And the camera started putting faces wherever the eyes were, rather than in my face and in Ashley's face. So, we stood up and we were like, whoa, let's create something that confuses all of these cameras that are looking at us, because they're looking at us all the time. And we don't necessarily want them to know and be able to track where we're going and what we're doing. So we were part of the new Inc. cohort this year, and Adam Harvey was also a member last year. And so we connected with him through, I think, a couple different channels and pitched him our idea. And he had been working on the idea as well, but didn't really have a avenue for showing it. And so it made a really nice intersection between, we had a platform and a textile that we wanted to create, and he was developing the technology to do it. So so that's kind of how it worked. Same, and then with...
Did you do any user testing or?
We had,
just you guys
no,
did
it was
these,
ours. Yeah, no, we didn't have any.
Study.
No, we were like to the wire. We had to pick up the scarves and get on a plane. So,
Yeah.
But luckily, they all worked and he was doing a lot of testing using heat maps, trying to look at. He's using OpenCV's computer vision algorithm, which is a very available one. And as it turns out, a lot of applications are also using it. The iOS and Android isn't using it, but there's many different forms of computer vision. So the first iteration that we did, OpenCV, Open Computer Vision. And it's kind of like the first one that you look at when you're creating using Connect or any type of camera, and you want to start recognizing faces. It's the first one that you can use. And then in terms of collaboration in terms of other people, we have been trying to create our own methodology and our own design philosophy around how do you address some of the really important issues like environmental impact, throwaway labor, the prison industrial complex, the healthcare and affordable housing, and how do you create work in a way that can be design interventions. So we've been meeting with a lot of people who have their own projects that they want to work on and been consulting in a way, trying to say, all right, you have this platform, you have this product. Now, who are you asking? Are you asking the children? Are you asking the adults? How are you understanding what kind of impact it would have in not only your experience, but also the experiences of those that you don't necessarily interact with or interface with on a daily basis?
And NSAF has really kind of created a platform for us to reach designers who didn't understand how to bring these larger questions into their work. We speak a lot, we go to schools, we try to integrate this work into the community and get people to be and think about design and how it impacts their own lives and their own surroundings. So it's really been kind of a collaborative process with people who don't necessarily consider themselves designers as well.
Mm-hmm. Did that answer your questions? Okay, great.
So I'm just really interested in all of the different speculative products that you present. And I work on camouflage and I'm wearing the camouflage hat. But so that leads me to some sort of specific things that your work makes me think about. And I guess one thing I'm wondering about is in the case of the scarf, and maybe I missed this, but how does one wear the scarf? So it seems to me, is the scarf something that I didn't quite get until maybe the end, that actually, even if one wears it around its neck, that it will somehow grab the software, and so that the computer vision will be scattered? Or is it something that you wear over your face?
It doesn't necessarily need to be over the face. The faces themselves need to show up near your face.
Yeah.
So it has to
Yeah.
be, right now,
Yeah.
the prototype that we had was a square, but
Yeah.
the user testing, like you were talking about, we realized, okay, that actually doesn't work. It needs to be a longer rectangle so you can put it around yourself and then drape it so that when a computer sees you, you have the maximal amount of faces that are in the correct orientation, that are, you know, flat kind of against your body, near your face. It doesn't need to be around your head.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be like covering you, because it's not going to remove your face from a camera. It's
Yeah.
just going to add all of the other faces. But that is where a lot of user testing needs to be done, how you wear it. We're working on creating our first kind of not prototype, but product to sell this winter. So we're creating a much longer one with instructions on how to wear it and how to achieve optimal results.
Mostly it's like having optimal surface area too.
Yeah.
So like what we had before just wasn't large enough.
I just, more generally, like one of the things that is interesting to me about sort of the way that you describe some of the products is that, you know, this kind of difference between, and this is sort of like maybe a philosophical, theoretical question about camouflage and identity and speculative, but, you know, some aspects of the products are presented in such a way that they're in the world and they're actually about human vision. So it looked like that visor, for example, was in part about, you know, if you're sitting in a boardroom with real people and you feel, you know, like you want to have that, it's about a certain kind of self-concealment, you know, with all seeingness, but in the real world. So it's not actually necessarily about computer vision, but actually about human vision. But then, you know, some of the products are also, and maybe that product too is engaging at the same time or even more centrally with kind of digital vision. And I find that really interesting because, I mean, it's both really interesting in itself, you know, in terms of whether those are different products or the same products, or, you know, do you have a scarf ultimately where it works for both, but also because it's just this like long-term issue, like in the history of camouflage since the 19th century, this kind of way of like projecting oneself into the position of this imagined viewer, right? And then what does it mean to be, if you're the designers, like thinking about yourself as this person who you're concealing yourself from, or as a kind of computer. I mean, these are just things that I was thinking about a lot.
And it's interesting because we've also experienced that with our products. We have an earring that's capturing your face, but maybe you're wearing the scarf. So,
Right.
you know, and so that was an interesting play in like our speculative products are along the entire spectrum. You know, we want to look at the physical manifestation of reality, and then also the digital manifestation, and how we can subvert the digital experience, but then how we can also be represented in the digital world, and then what are our identities in the digital world, especially from like historically, how are we represented and how do we identify. So
It's about subverting the gaze, or who has control over the gaze, you know, especially as we're at this transitory state between physical and digital. It's kind of like we have one foot in both of these realms. And we wanted to play with that as far as like surveillance, especially as it relates to communities of color, and who, you know, is this all-seeing eye, and how can we create symbols around those to get people to think about what their place in this kind of like stature is.
So just a quick follow. In your research, are you looking at, so there, you know, other people have, Martin Bax has done a sort of camouflage mask. So pixel head, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. And which is to cover you also from human gaze. Or Simone Niquil does these like fabrics that have like Obama and a million other people on them. That kind of your idea, a little more literal maybe than, but all to say they've made this stuff. They've probably tried it. Is your research something that looks at those practices, or is your research more the technical side of, does this scarf work?
It's
How does it work with the camera?
technical side. I mean, I think it's when you look at, like, Ashley and I were looking at a piece of clothing that is similar to like Andy Warhol, where it's like the representation of the face over and over again. And then how does that translate to a digital textile that is focused on the technology? It is what it really is as hyperface is it's a low resolution image of a face. It's the 100% trigger for OpenCV's computer vision algorithm to look at this basically like 16 pixel by 16 pixel face and say, oh, this is a face. Every time I see this, as a computer, I am programmed to recognize 2 eyes, a mouth, and this kind of gradient of color. So when it takes our picture, it turns us into black and white, and then it de-resolutions that picture to like a 16 by 16 bit photo. And that's really what the technology is, embedded in a scarf, but then also playing with scale. So you have tiny faces that compose bigger faces, so that when you get closer to a camera or farther away, it doesn't matter. It still starts recognizing the ones that are closer and farther away. I was gonna say I have a video of it that you guys can see. It'll probably help. But yeah, it's really about the technology. Does it work? And of course, because I think William Gibson has been talking about facial recognition and subverting it and what it would look like. But this is really a lot of people are talking about it, but this is trying to create a textile that actually works. What is the best way for it to work? Does it work in a poncho? Does it work in a scarf? Does it work as a T-shirt or as a suit? Or what's the optimal way?
The idea of facial recognition here is it at least as it is now, it seems like it's to occlude the existence of there being a face, not the identity of the particular face. Right? It's supposed to be like it's to confuse the whole idea that there's actually a confirmed human face present.
Well, it will still see the face. It'll still recognize a face, but it will also recognize all of the other faces. And detect. Yeah.
So it'll be harder to put an identity to your face because of all of the other faces that are on the screen.
I just want to sort of speak a little bit about the earrings. I just finished a film on women's spies in India, and a lot of the objects that you're speaking of are being used even on a daily basis by women who are investigators to spy on other people for other people. So they have like earrings, they have pendants with cameras, they have purses with cameras. So the entire, and it's very interesting because all the markers that we associate with women who are only involved or obsessed with appearance are used to then sort of kind of enter into and defy boundaries of what a woman can get out of a place. So I find the earring an interesting artifact because it's used by people to spy on people, and then sort of you're placing it in a discourse where you're saying it's people being able to record a moment which is their point of view.
And protect a bit, because we've seen so much violence and against people of color in the United States. We saw this little girl whose father got killed right in front of her, and it was live streamed on Facebook. And what would her interaction, we want to know what happened, what was, not just the aftermath. And we noticed that, as Ece was saying, you bring out your phone, you start recording, and you put people in danger. People in other countries are recording each other like this, so they can't necessarily see them, but they can see what's going on here, but you can't see their identity. And so the idea of protection and security is very important to us right now. It's our only way to defend ourselves in some instances. So how can we start embedding that into our daily lives so it's not some wearable technology pendant or something that doesn't fit outside of the framework of our, what we want or what we our culture.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering how you're going to reorient the discourse around the object, because that very device exists, and people are using it to spy on other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a moment of witnessing, like you said, but
And I think-
how do you plan to sort of...
I think that's where the community involvement comes
conversation
in.
around, this is specifically to talk about police brutality, or how we're talking about it, how we can move beyond what's going on here, and what kind of tools can the community use to just show an alternative perspective, whatever that perspective is. And so, the earring was to place this really within a cultural context, because, door knocker earrings is, like, as far as hip hop culture, like, it's very specific. And that's a way of talking about how this is more so impacting, black and brown communities, of like, not getting justice.
And also going into groups and talking about this project, we've overwhelmingly heard from Black women that this is a product that they could use in their community, that they would use. And so it's something that's where it's like, okay, this was our speculation, and now it's our responsibility to see if what we would design for ourselves or for our friends actually transcends into a larger community, to see what their needs would be through their experience.
And I think it's what they said before too, with all these products and all these programming and data and knowledge, it's like who is using it, and that's how you circumvent, right?
I'm going to show you guys really quickly the camouflage, just so you can see how it works.
Wow, it really works.
So it'll capture her face, but then it also triggers these other faces, or it's triggered by these.
Snapchat is just a really good way to show
Snapchat
how
is
it
the
works.
best way to show how it works, yeah.
You guys added the dog.
Huh?
Oh, it looks like it.
Yeah, we use so Snapchat has a bunch of filters. It has like animals, or mostly something with ears. And so it turns you into an animal. And when you hold the scarf up next to it, next to your face, it starts triggering, it immediately sees those before it sees a nuanced face, because it's, Adam has extrapolated the optimal face to trigger the algorithm.
So it works better than if you were just like wearing a T-shirt with like photo reproductions of like all your friends. That it really zooms in on whatever that.
Yeah.
Is that a thing where, like, let's say that this was implemented, would that be a thing then, that let's say you're the people designing the computer vision, that would be pretty easy to tweak and to be like, oh, okay, well now we're in a war, now we're in this kind of, now we got to get into this counter surveillance. Like, they designed that scarf, so now we better tweak that algorithm.
Well, that's the battle.
You know what I mean? And then
that's
does that
the
become
updating of hardware and software, and you have like
Right.
the rebels in tech that are going to make the counter surveillance products. Then you have the governments or whatever who are going to make the counter. But if these digital tools extend our will. So as long as we have the will that we don't want to be marketed to and advertised to depending on where we walk and how we buy and what we do, we're going to be able to come up with clever ideas as a society that can hopefully subvert some of the maybe more stagnant thinking that is going on in these institutions, because I don't think that we are the people that they're employing, and there's a lot of us that are thinking in subversive ways.
Yeah.
So
And being informed citizens,
That's neat. So it seems like, in a way, like in a fleshed out world of these scarves, like probably you guys or whomever's doing it would start issuing, there'd be an update scarf,
Definitely.
every,
for sure.
yeah.
And right now, that's something that's difficult with technology is, we have to create something. Adam's on his third iteration, because we started with OpenCV and then we did cascading neural networks, and then now we're doing the, I think for the iOS 8, it's like, what is it? There's 2 pictures by, I don't remember what the word is, but there's constant updates. But the funny thing is that a lot of people around the world are still using the iPhone 4 or the iPhone 3. So a lot of the technology that, is that the first iteration used still can work and is still relevant. So it is a constant hardware update and a textile update, but there's still a lot of people who are using the original. Anyone else have questions?
I just had like an observation, kind of comparing the two methodologies that you had with the first kind of like this mask and versus kind of the scarf. Because with the first one, and I was kind of like, it was refreshing with the scarf that, and also the fact that you call it a scarf, and kind of that it brings so much complexity and not erasure. Because the erasure has been a methodology that has been used for women for a long time. It has been as a way of protection, but at the same time, like for women, in order to protect themselves, they had to erase themselves in order to be protected. So that kind of like that kind of boundary of like what does it mean? So I felt like with the one that you had, wearing it in the reality of life, that's like something similar to this is used in many different cultures, beside other things. But this way of like being able to look through and seeing everybody, but not other people having access to it. But at the same time, it's like very much in like with them. It's very much like the definition of like also, even though it's empowering, but also erasing yourself and kind of. So it's interesting with the new with this methodology of like looking into the virtual world, even though that there are some sort of like a coverage of some sort of some part of your body, however you decide to use it, but you multiplying the face of, like if we consider women, like you're multiplying it, not erasing it. So I really like that sort of new kind of way of like looking into that multiplication of becomes a kind of confusion and protection versus erasure.
And actually the visor, it's not, well, it does erase your face, let's say, but because we're using this dichroic material, it inherently reflects one color and lets pass through another. So when you're wearing it, the observer sees their reflection in the visor itself. So when you are wearing this and somebody is aggressive toward you and you put it down, they see themselves in you. So it's a little bit different than having an element or an accessory that they just don't have access to you. They have to see themselves on your body, and they have to look at their actions and respond in that way to who they are, as you've decided to, block them and protect yourself. So.
But also, I have like another comment too. Because you talk about SPF. There are parts of Iran and also I know in like Saudi Arabia, like that the sun is very sharp. So like women actually that they use, that's also kind of like a protective environmentally that they use, because the slit that they have in their eye is very small, so it kind of acts as almost like a sunglass. So women are environmentally more protected in terms of their eyes versus men who are not using it. So I was like kind of thinking about the nuances that you have, like about sunscreen and like what other elements like culturally has been used before.
That's very interesting. And I think that one of the reasons we want to come here and work and collaborate is to find out how, these products can extend through and be interpreted through other cultures. It's our goal as women from all over the world, and we work with people all over the world. We want to create products and experiences that can be experienced across cultures and cross genders and ages. And so one of our big objectives while we come here is to get the input of people who are interested in our work and see how it can be augmented and how it can be interpreted and in other societies and in other places, just because we don't necessarily have access to that thought or that culture. And so but it is something that we're extremely interested in and want to continue developing. So.
Yeah, but like having the access to the visual world, I think it's really easy to kind of make those connections too. I'm sure like there are many kind of women that they work in different countries that they are very connected to the visual aspect and technology. So it would be interesting to kind of see how they can be included in the conversation. So the perspective.
Because the Salon is a place that is experienced in every culture.
Right, yes.
We all go and sit in the same kind of place. We all have the same kind of experience with the person who is, you know, adjusting our identity or changing our hair or whatever it is.
Not all.
That's, but actually, I think that, you know, self-care and, you know, in also like poor cultures, you know, food and how you clean yourself is a very important
Right.
part of your experience.
Right, but not everyone has access
Right.
to a salon, that's all.
Well, but not, I mean,
But you
but a
could say
salon can
virtual
represent,
salon. Yeah,
can
just
be
that act.
represented, not in necessarily a fancy salon where you go in and you have like a manicure and stuff, but a space where you sit with somebody and they, you know, comb your hair, they wash your hair, or, you know, it doesn't have to look the same, but the idea of a
Or
space.
just like, I think we've all had experience with ritual, and I think like ritualistic self-care can, you know, serve a purpose across, you know, many spectrums.
Yeah, there's also like a homosocial intimacy again, right?
Right.
It's one of those heterotopic spaces which we don't see outside. They exist for a bit and then they dissolve and they come back. So yeah, I think that's interesting too. It reminds me a lot of like there are trains in Bombay where you have only women on the train in certain compartments. So when they're together, they do everything. And there's ritualistic things like they're cooking on the train. They're celebrating you know, festivals. They mark births, anniversaries and things. It's all on the train. And these are women who only meet to go to work, and you know, and then they get off. So you know, it sort of also reminds me of that. So there are these mobile spaces as well, which exist in cultures, which can be used for transportation.
And also, like, even though maybe salon for like like going to a salon is not necessarily for everybody, but like that sort of like a grooming or communal grooming in the home spaces also like
Yeah.
is yeah. So.
And why wouldn't a brain optimization practice happen in those spaces? And how would that look like? You know, if we wanted to take it from like grooming, but then also grooming our minds and removing some of the traumatic experiences that we've had, or replacing them with different experiences and knowledge, you know.
Just to pick up on your point about other cultures using this erasure strategy, and it came up in the skin in the sunblock thing, I think, when I read the slide. That are you picking up techniques from Namibia or?
Well, we're looking to investigate alternative practices from zinc.
That's a great idea.
You know, looking at the red women in Himba, Namibia, use a red clay to protect themselves from the sun. So instead of having a
Like
white zinc-based solution, looking at a different colored solution, you know, that you know, put in your skin.
And maybe a more eco-friendly solution than what comes out of the big pharma. Yeah.
And also puts back into, you know, the economy. I think one of the biggest problems with the economics of the beauty industry is that, you know, Black and brown women are huge they have a huge investment. It's a $6 billion industry, yet their communities don't see returns from their purchasing power. It's not, their money isn't going back into their communities. So how do you, and even for us, how do we create a ecosystem where we can be sustainable and talk about the work that we want to develop? And you know, that stability is really important for any group that wants to develop kind of out there work that's talking about things that big corporations don't want to talk about. So, looking at how can we repurpose some of the money that is, or not necessarily repurpose, but put it back into the communities that are really a huge part of these industries.
Yeah, talking about it in a way that's solutions oriented, because it is like, I think in the next 2 to 5 years, the total economic net worth of like Black and Latina households is going to be zero. How do we start talking about economic sustainability and progression in a way, and through art, in a way that's accessible? So that's a huge goal for us.
You mentioned kind of working or talking in universities or working with, when you mentioned, brain optimization or like kind of like a brain care or emotional care, and with all the kind of the new science and the importance behind it, like what I was wondering is that, because this is also like something that is not even in the school system yet, like this is not something that is recognized as something that we need to be trained about, and a lot of like trauma that exists in the certain culture would there is no alternative ways of learning about these even through a school system. So I'm wondering if you are also thinking about methodologies of like maybe when you get into like that it could be even like take that sort of generation gap and kind of like how early that starts if you're talking about trauma and like emotional care and the methodologies that exist now, or
well, I think one of those places starts in video games and how you're represented digitally, especially now. What are the avatars that are available? What do they look like? And then how are you interacting with different avatars in video games? For example, some very popular video games have mostly Black and brown people as the enemies, as the avatars, rather than like robots or something. So starting to create digital representations that are not stereotypes is one way that I think at a very young age we can start having representation that can subvert some traumas, because I think that is a traumatic experience to be playing video games but only see yourself as the enemy, and you're only shooting at the enemy or removing them. So I think that's one place that we're looking at creating these new representations. But when it comes to like traumas, what our characters say in the experience is you're free from the constraints of reality. The only limit is your imagination. And
yeah, it's something that stays with you through the end. And we've had a lot of people who come into our installation, they're like, what is this? They're kind of unsure of what they're going to see, what they're going to experience, and they go through the VR and they come out of it, and it's almost like a brain massage, I guess. Like, they didn't quite understand how it was going to impact them, especially because in VR, like, we have your undivided attention for 4 minutes, You're inside of this space, and we're giving you an uplifting message. And then when you come out of it, it's almost like you didn't understand how trauma or your experiences or follow you wherever you go. And in this space, you can kind of let go of all of that. And so we're trying to think about how emerging technology can be a way of intervening in traumatic experiences and through repetition of images and narratives.
And positive reinforcement. Yeah. Also, that we don't get recognized often as individuals, and I think in this experience, we're simulating this brain optimization experience. And we're seeing that with VR, you don't really have to send low impulse signal or voltage to your brain in order to have a hyper focus and hyperflow experience. Like, you can trick your mind, and you can use virtual reality and this feeling of embodiment and presence and interaction with this other being or whatever it is, environment, to give you the same results. And so when you start looking at how that impacts young people, a lot of traumas happen in the classroom. So being able to recreate classroom environments that, where you're not the only Latina child in a class of 50, but rather you are having an educational experience where it's just you or with a teacher or something, and you can let go of the rest of your immediate built environment. How does that impact our upbringing? What traumas do we subvert by having those experiences? And I think that that's really where virtual reality is, in one way that virtual reality is really interesting. Of course, it's not going to be a substitute, and I don't necessarily think that it's a saving technology at all. But I think that there can be some interesting results, especially when it comes to trauma and when it comes to pain management, that we can start looking at the effects of these new technologies and these new experiences to, let ourselves become something and let ourselves be, do what we want to do.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello.
This is
So
Heidi.
I put myself on mute.
Why don't you introduce yourself, since they don't know who you are? Well, you're tiny.
Okay.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Oops, well,
Just go to the
doesn't matter.
Skype app, I think.
Sorry, I had wanted to be there. Actually, I teach in New York, so at CUNY. So part of my question is around that, because I teach emerging media technology, and primarily all of my students are first generation students to college. They're immigrants, they're a wide range of ethnicities, and I intentionally taught there because what I'm trying to do is actually diversify the tech industry, which seems to be very much in keeping with what you're after as well, to some extent. So I guess my question was, so I teach game design, physical computing, so it intersects with a lot of the things that you're doing in the lab, and I run speculative design workshops as well. And the reason for that is because I feel like these are students. So I'm wondering, my question actually is around whether or not you're thinking about you mentioned co-creational processes and working with communities, but I'm wondering if you've thought about working with young people at different universities, especially, public education systems, where you can run speculative design workshops to actually co-create the products as well as representational experiences in those environments. So, because I feel, all of our students, I teach game design, and they're there because they play games. But as you mentioned, right, there's so much misogyny and racism that are inherent in the games that they play, and yet there seems to be a disconnect between their awareness of those representations and how they affect their lives, and trying to push them to design new games based on their own experiences. So I feel like it would be interesting, as you're thinking about, going to other countries and moving across the country, how you're thinking about using speculative design workshops to actually not only think about representational shifts, but even we're stuck using these products, right? These technologies, these hardware technologies that are designed primarily by a bunch of white dudes, right? So I'm wondering if, as we start to think, part of my interest is in, shifting the trajectory of where technology is going, which is very disembodied, and how we can bring it back to the body, affect, the senses, and all of these things. And by working with young people, actually kind of disrupting their normative ways of thinking about the tools that they have to use and are dependent upon every day, and then finding a way to kind of work with them to redesign something else, right? Like to shift our trajectory.
Yeah.
So, I very much appreciated all of the comments you're saying. It's so much in keeping, like I resonate very strongly with everything you've been articulating, and I experienced the work at Tribeca as well. So I wish I could have been there. I really wanted to be, it's just I couldn't come this semester, so.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that one of the,
Why don't you mute yourself
Okay.
again?
So one of the
Sure. No
things
worries.
that we found was that especially academia surrounding brain science happens in very closed environments, which is why we kind of wanted to start bringing it into the public sphere, why we wanted to bring it to film festivals so we could get an idea and engage with people who weren't in academia. And I think the same goes for public education. You know, the majority of Black and brown and minority students are in public schools, in public, in colleges. The way that we've been trying to work with young people is through internships with Brooklyn Public Schools and getting them involved in understanding what we're doing. And we found that, one of our interns, she's a really great artist, but she was only drawing white characters, and she was a young Black woman. And so starting to ask the questions of how can I be represented in my own work, and hopefully inspiring her as well as other young people to start embedding their stories, their bodies in these new mediums. Because we want to see a digital landscape that reflects and represents the reality that we live in. We don't want to be in this homogenous state and homogenous future. So we're trying to bring this to as many places and meet with as many people. But the reality is, outside of public school, there isn't much diversity. And
so we've gone to a number of schools. We started at San Francisco State, then we went to the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. We went to the Rebuild Foundation in Chicago. I was just at Parsons last week. Where else have we been? A few other schools.
Yeah.
Like Carmen said, the sort of the range of diversity at these different institutions is very different. Whereas at San Francisco State, our entire workshop was people from
film students
we had film
and biology
students.
students. So we started crossing the disciplines, which is we come from very
people
different
to from different fields to one another to see how they can cross-pollinate ideas, and that's really kind of like what we're interested in doing. But then when we go to design school at Parsons, there's no diversity in any of the design classes at all. And sort of talking about these things and talking about the issues that we're talking about, there's no context. So we have to do a lot of work of explaining why these things are necessary, why these conversations are necessary. So it's really like we're kind of tailoring our delivery for our audience, and thinking about how to get people who, some of these issues that we speak about are completely foreign or not something that might ever come up for certain individuals, and it's understanding how best to engage on, I don't want to say an empathetic level, because I think it goes beyond empathy. It's more of exposure and thinking about, who is populating the world, who's going to use the products and be exposed
and also
to the work that you're creating.
Who is building our future?
Right.
And how do we make sure that we have a voice in our future, and we're not just sitting and having the future happen to us. So starting to ask these questions of how do we get, what do you want the future for yourself, for your family, for your friends to look like, and how are you involved in that?
In your work, have you thought at all about future of work? Is that something that you've dealt with?
You mean beyond all the time?
No, not your personal. Sorry, not your personal future.
No, just like future, like what
does
in terms
work
of
look like in the
futures
future?
of work,
Well,
has that ever come up in any discussion?
The big discussion about the future of work is automation, right? And whether automation is going to be a supplement to our work or it's going to replace us. I think it's important to acknowledge that there will be a unemployable class. There will be there will be a class that doesn't have a home, that is permanently displaced, but they're going to be doing something else. So we need to be thinking about what is that something else going to be, and speculating on what that is. And I think it is time to start looking at how us and our communities are going to be are going to be working, because we're constantly presented with self-driving cars, but that are only for, you know, the upper echelon and the upper class. But then how do we fit in them? Are we just not going to be able to have self-driving cars? Are we going to just be ignored? Or did you see the film at Tribeca with what was it called? The self-driving
Auto or something?
Auto, yeah. Did you see that one? Oh, it's really, really fascinating. But it's about a driver who kind of refuses to let go of the fact that everybody is driving in self-driving cars, and now the people who are, calling for cars don't want a driver, and they feel uncomfortable with a driver.
Well, these drivers are like mediators between people who might not be fully comfortable with being in a self-driving car. Mm-hmm. And the protagonist is an immigrant from Ethiopia, and he's very much entrenched in the old world of like, I'm driving this car, and this is, my well-being, this is how I support my family. Mm-hmm. And then, he picks up a couple who doesn't want him in the car at all.
Doesn't want to engage with anybody who doesn't necessarily look like them, or, feel uncomfortable with him being there, and then, ask him to leave while their car takes them to their restaurant, and he's kind of stranded there. So it's really, you start thinking about, wow, how will my community be affected by the future of work?
Right, and because we so often are presented with technology through this utopian lens, and we don't necessarily think about like the alternative implications of who's going to be impacted by technology.
Well, a utopian and a dystopian. It's either utopian, where we're living in these glass castles with like green trees everywhere and nobody around, or we're living in these like post-apocalyptic smog-filled cities with too many people, too many LEDs. And but like realistically, that's not what's going to happen.
Right.
And so there's another teacher you should look up. You probably already know him, Paolo Cardini. He's from Rutgers or RISD or something. He spoke at Primer, and he's a speculative designer that goes to like Iran and India and Russia and I think like El Salvador or different places throughout the world, and takes the technologies that we have in America and starts like rethinking, saying, okay, you have virtual reality, and the one in India reminds me a lot of it, or sticks out in my mind, but how do you use it in your culture? Mm-hmm. How would you use the craft to create a virtual reality headset? So the students that he worked with got traditional craftsmen to actually create the visor, and they used it as a meditation experience, where you can just put this on and you don't even need virtual reality, right? And so he's a great teacher, I think, and that has a really wonderful practice around how do you start talking about themes of speculative design to like alternative groups or edge case groups or whatever that aren't the like Eurocentric middle and upper class. And
so to me this raises a question I'm sure you guys have thought a lot about, and you use terms like product and store. You've got a store. And of course, these are very loaded words in terms of an economic order that accounts for huge amounts of injustice, structural injustice. Mm-hmm. So why is that? Why, if one is in a speculative domain, why isn't that a site of critique? Or maybe you're doing it really ironically, and I miss the irony. But
well, it's your critique has to be based in reality, I think.
Yeah, there's alternates to capitalism. They've been
yeah.
So
I think the entry point for us is creating this familiar shop, or especially inside the beauty salon, where when you enter, there's a range of products that you can buy or engage with, or whatever.
Reinforcing like a given that's really, if you want to account for structural inequity, like one of the big causes comes from an economic order that thrives on a an army of unemployed people. And that thrives on commodification, that's destroying the ecosystem so we can have more product and turn it over more. And people's dream is to sort of be part of that system that's going to kill us all. And then meanwhile, your product says, let's actually go back to Namibia and look at how people do it with dirt. Let's look at how people can make how visors can be made out of whatever. Like, those are interesting alternatives that critique, in a way, hold the mirror up to a system that is fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, and I think that's what making a critique about, typically when you go into a salon, the products that you see there were either made by the people who own the salon or made by people in the community. So it has been this sort of like maker culture. And like also like these are products that we've made and want to make available to the community. But as far as thinking about consumerism and like commodification of goods, it brings up a very interesting point. Like, how do we move beyond that? And the thing is, like, there have been alternatives to consumerism, but how are they put into practice right now in a way that is accessible for people?
That's exactly what needs to be speculated about. The word product, by the way, is a really interesting word. End of the 19th century, its meaning shifts to become investing for profit. So when we talk about making a movie as a production or a producer, this is when the maker part of it is disaggregated from the economics of it. I'll send you. It's a wonderful article.
But isn't part of the goal too to put the money in the hands of other people? I mean, we're not even at that,
Right. So it's not about shareholders, or it's about creating a feedback loop of economic sustainability within a community.
Until you have another alternative, just even first step, step one.
It strikes me that step one of speculation is to think outside the system that's killing us. That really accounts for so much of what's wrong. That's where we need to hold a mirror up to that. All the stuff that you're looking at is
But they're
part
in
of
a
it.
way not even. Well, they are in the system, but they're in the system in a different way. Like, they're not even at the system of.
I mean, in terms of just maybe concretizing that, I mean, I'm thinking about the scarves, right, which seem like the thing that you really you've made or that exist, and what are the different kind of possibilities in what's going to happen? Let's say, I don't know if you're starting to sell them or if you're giving them away or whatever your model is at present, but what's you imagine what's your ideal there? I mean, just in terms of a pyramid scheme in which communities are going, or selling it to what if Target was oh, we want to buy it, we'll make it accessible to every, we'll sell it for $2. Is that, let's say that actually happened, and maybe it will, or maybe L'Oreal will decide they want to buy the idea from you. Is that what would you do with that? It seems like, and that might be sort of a concrete.
We would really like to be able to pay our rent too.
Yeah.
Because
There's two arguments. Some people want to sit at the lunch counter, and some people want to create their own counter. Right. So it's there's different ways of critiquing.
And I think also with our ideas, even the name neurospeculative Afrofeminism is, and the words virtual reality, speculative design is, a cognitive impact research. For a lot of people, they are very afraid of what we're doing because they don't understand. They don't know where to enter. So then product design, there's a tangible element that they can hold and interact with that's familiar. And so I think your point is very valid and very interesting, and some place that we want to continue exploring. But in showing a product and a project to the public who generally want to be entertained and don't necessarily want to do so much work on their end, it's, we have to create entry points, because we weren't willing to reduce the name to something more simple. So when people were like, what is neurospeculative Afrofeminism? It's well, there's virtual reality, product design, and scientific research. And so then leading in with product design, people can start to understand, and have a easier time grappling with some of the more difficult themes of, systemic injustices and that we're trying to tackle. So and it's hard. It's really hard. And what we've realized is that idea that, oh, maybe Target would come buy this thing from us, like, that's not happening. That's not going to happen. They've seen it, I'm sure. But the moment that we're talking about Black and brown women and Black and brown people in a lens of design and saying this is the group that we're designing for, it's it's not, to them it's not marketable. So
I think it's also about reappropriating that language. We talk about appropriation of language and think about how much power we give to companies over our lives and our narratives and things like that. And we want to, what happens when you take that same language and you place it towards issues that are impacting us, towards social justice? Does it hold the same power? Can we destroy capitalism by appropriating capitalism into, things that actually matter?
We had this discussion with the word documentary, whether we take a new word or whether we work with that tradition. But anyway, we have to stop. This has been fascinating. We have to let you guys go, and people here have to move on. But thank you very much.
Thank you guys.